Beneath the Surface. Episode 2: The Second Phone. Previously on Beneath the Surface. Laura Mendez had spent 2 weeks planning her 12th anniversary dinner. The candles. The wine. The new tablecloth. Ricardo had come home late. His phone had been left on the kitchen counter. She had read the messages. She had found Carolina. She had confronted Ricardo, and he had offered the performance of a man being reasonable about something that was not reasonable at all. He had slept in the guest room. And in the morning, on the same kitchen counter where his forgotten phone had changed everything the night before, Laura had found something else. A second phone. Smaller. Older. Tucked behind the fruit bowl as if placed there by habit. As if it belonged to a life that ran parallel to the one she could see. She had turned it on. And what she found on that phone had nothing to do with Carolina. The screen was old. The interface was the kind you stopped seeing on newer models years ago. Someone had chosen this phone specifically because it was simple. Because it held what it needed to hold and nothing more. Laura stood in the kitchen in the early morning light and scrolled. There were no social apps. No email. No photos. Only messages. And the messages were between Ricardo and a contact saved as May. Mother. Dona Sonia. Laura read the most recent message first. It had been sent 4 days ago. It said, "Everything is proceeding. The last transfer went through Tuesday. By the time she finds out, if she finds out, there will be nothing left to find." Laura read it again. She set the phone on the counter and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed. By the time she finds out. If she finds out. She was the she. She picked up the phone again. She read for 40 minutes without moving from her position at the counter. The conversation between Ricardo and Dona Sonia went back 2 years and 3 months. 2 years and 3 months of planning that she had lived inside of without knowing it existed. The first messages were cautious. Exploratory. Ricardo raising a possibility. Dona Sonia responding with the measured enthusiasm of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this conversation. The plan, assembled from hundreds of messages read in order, was this. Ricardo had been systematically transferring money from the accounts they shared jointly into a separate account that Laura had no knowledge of and no access to. The transfers were small enough, individually, to avoid triggering any bank notification threshold she might see. A few thousand one month. Slightly more the next. Structure to look, from the outside, like ordinary business expenses that a wife who no longer worked would have no reason to question. Over 2 years and 3 months, the transfers totaled an amount that Laura had to read 3 times before the number settled into something real. It was most of what they had. The apartment. The savings account. An investment portfolio Ricardo had insisted on managing himself, which she had taken as a sign of his competence and which now revealed itself as a wall she had never been permitted to look behind. Dona Sonia had contributed something equally specific, a lawyer. Not the kind of lawyer who handles disputes. The kind who handles disappearances. The kind who helps a man restructure his financial life so that when a marriage ends, it ends with the minimum possible obligation to the woman leaving. The lawyer's name appeared 17 times in the messages. Laura photographed every screen with her own phone. She photographed the lawyer's name. The account numbers that appeared in 2 of the messages. The dates. The amounts that were named directly. She was not shaking. She had passed through the part of this that produced shaking sometime around the third or fourth message. What was on the other side of shaking, she was discovering, was something quieter and colder and more useful. Ricardo came into the kitchen at 7:43. He was wearing the clothes he had slept in. His hair was uncombed. He looked like a man who had spent the night rehearsing explanations rather than sleeping, and who was not yet certain which explanation he intended to use. He saw Laura standing at the counter. He saw the second phone in her hand. And the thing that happened to his face in that moment was different from what had happened to his face the night before when she had shown him the messages with Carolina. The night before, there had been calculation. The rapid assessment of damage and response. This was something else. This was a man who understood that the wrong thing had been found. Laura said nothing. She held up the phone so he could see the screen clearly. The message she had left open. The one from Donna Sonia, 4 days ago. By the time she finds out, if she finds out, there will be nothing left to find. Ricardo said her name. His voice had a different quality than it had the night before. Less rehearsed. She said, "Sit down." He said, "Laura, I can explain." She said, "Sit down, Ricardo." He sat. She told him what she knew. She did not frame it as a question. She had spent 40 minutes reading. She did not need his confirmation to understand what she had read. She told him the account numbers. She told him the amounts. She told him the lawyer's name. His face, as she spoke, performed a series of adjustments that she watched with the detached attention of someone who had already decided to remember everything. When she finished, he said, "It's not what it looks like." She said, "You told me that last night. About something completely different." He said nothing. She said, "How long were you planning to leave?" He was quiet. She said, "The transfers started 2 years ago. Beatriz was 8. Tomas was 5. You were moving money out of our accounts when Tomas was 5 years old." He looked at the table. She said, "Did you ever intend to tell me?" He said, "Things became complicated." She said, "Things became complicated." He said, "Between us. You know things haven't been good between us for a long time." She said, "So you decided to steal from me instead of talking to me." The word steal seemed to land on him differently than the rest of what she had said. He looked up. He said, "I didn't steal." She said, "You moved our money into an account I didn't know existed with the help of your mother and a lawyer whose name I am going to know by the end of today. If that is not stealing, tell me what word you would use." He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I was going to make sure you and the children were provided for." She said, "With what?" "With what was left after you finished." He did not answer. She said, "Carolina was a distraction. It was not a question." He said, "That's not." She said, "Not on purpose, maybe. Maybe you weren't clever enough for it to be deliberate. But it worked the same way. I spent last night thinking about Carolina. About what she meant. About how long. About whether there were others. And while I was thinking about all of that, the real question was sitting on the kitchen counter in a phone I almost didn't find." She picked up her own phone. She showed him the photographs she had taken of the screens. She said, I have copies of everything. The account numbers. The amounts. The dates. The lawyer's name. Your mother's messages. His jaw tightened. She said, I want you out of this apartment today. He said, Laura. She said, today, Ricardo. Before the children come home. He left at 10:30. He took a bag. He took his laptop. He took the second phone, which she handed to him with a deliberateness that communicated exactly what she intended it to communicate. She no longer needed it. She had everything it contained. The apartment was quiet after the door closed. The breakfast dishes were on the table. She had made coffee and toast and eaten standing at the counter while he packed, because the children would be home in the afternoon and someone needed to have eaten breakfast and it was going to be her. She sat down at the kitchen table with her coffee and looked at the new tablecloth. It was still there from the night before. Still smooth. Still white. Still unused in the way that things are unused when the occasion they were purchased for never arrived. She thought about Donna Sonia. She thought about a woman who had called her son every day for 12 years. Who had attended their children's birthdays with gifts chosen to demonstrate taste. Who had sat across from Laura at family dinners and asked about the children's school and whether Laura was keeping busy and all the other questions that contained, embedded within them, the suggestion that Laura's life was small and required occasional acknowledgement from someone with a larger one. A woman who had spent 2 years helping her son drain their joint accounts. A woman who had found them a lawyer to make the disappearance clean. Laura's phone rang at 11:15. The name on the screen was Donna Sonia. Laura looked at it for the 4 rings it took to stop. Then she looked at it again when a voicemail notification appeared. She did not listen to the voicemail. She called Isabella instead. Isabella was her closest friend. They had been friends since university. Isabella was a lawyer, which was something that had seemed like a pleasant coincidence for most of their friendship and which now seemed like something else entirely. Laura said, I need you to come over. And I need you to bring the name of the best family law attorney you know. Not a good one. The best one. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm leaving now. Laura said, thank you. She hung up. She looked at the tablecloth one more time. Then she folded it, carefully, and put it in the drawer. She was not going to use it for this. Isabella arrived at noon. She had brought lunch and a legal pad and the composure of a woman who had spent 15 years in rooms where people were falling apart and had learned how to be useful in those rooms. Laura showed her the photographs. Every screen. Every message. Every account number and date and amount and the lawyer's name that appeared 17 times. Isabella looked at them in silence for a long time. Then she said, this is financial abuse. What he did is a crime, Laura. It is not just infidelity. It is not just a bad marriage. What he and his mother planned and executed together is legally actionable. Laura said, can I get it back? Isabella said, some of it. Possibly most of it, depending on how the accounts are structured and what the lawyer they hired actually managed to do. But yes. This is traceable. Bank transfers leave records. His mother's involvement in the planning is documented in those messages. You have a strong case. Laura said, he said he was going to make sure the children and I were provided for. Isabella said nothing. Laura said, I believed him once. About other things. I'm done believing what he says about what he intends to do. Isabella said, that's the right instinct. Laura said, his mother called this morning. I didn't answer. Isabella said, don't answer. Not yet. Not until we understand exactly what they have in place and what we can move against. The moment Donna Sonia knows you have documentation, things will change very quickly on their end. Laura said, she already knows I found the second phone. Ricardo will have told her. Isabella said, then we don't have much time. She picked up her pen. She said, tell me everything, from the beginning. Every detail you remember. Laura folded her hands on the table. Outside, the city went about its morning. The children would be home in a few hours. She had a few hours. She began to talk. There is a version of this story where Laura Mendez goes back. Where she decides that the known weight of what she has is lighter than the unknown weight of what comes after. Where she accepts the explanation, or the half-explanation, or the promise of an explanation, and returns to the life she had. Quieter now. Changed. But familiar. Some women do this. It is not weakness. It is the mathematics of survival in a situation where every option has a cost and the costs are being paid by people who did not choose any of this. Beatriz and Tomas did not choose any of this. But Laura Mendez had spent 12 years managing a silence that was costing her something she had not yet learned to count. She had learned to count it now. In account numbers. In transfer dates. In the name of a lawyer hired to make sure she ended up with as little as possible. In the messages of a mother-in-law who had sat at her dinner table and used her politeness against her. That number was clear now. And Laura Mendez, it turned out, was very good with numbers. She had just never been allowed to see these ones before. This is episode 2. Laura Mendez knows what she's dealing with now. The question is what she intends to do about it. Episode 3 is coming.